Hi, and welcome to the show, everybody. I'm your host, Jack Canfield, and my guest today is Dr. Cheryl White, who is an ordained minister, a college professor, and an author with over 30 years of experience serving and leading others. And she's the author of a great book called The Underground Angel, the life story of Laura Haviland, who was an abolitionist, a humanitarian, and an unsung hero, or heroine, I should say, of the Underground Railroad. And Haviland's life work from 150 years ago inspired Dr. White to create a relevant campaign entitled 7 Steps of Good Trouble, an apolitical, relevant framework for thriving in our divided, deeply divided country today, which it certainly is. So welcome to the show, Cheryl.
Thank you so much, Jack, for having me here. Thank you.
Well, I'm so glad to have you here because I think what you're writing about is so important right now. So let's start by talking about what events inspired you to write this book.
Yes, in 1995, I lost a dear friend in the tragic Oklahoma City bombing. And she had always encouraged me to go for my dreams, pursue, what I believed God had for me. And I wanted to be a college professor. And I had that opportunity. I moved to Haviland, Kansas. And there I was introduced to this treasure of a woman from our history, Laura Smith Haviland. Her picture was in the library of the Berkeley College Quaker Room. And it's just the research, and the more I studied about it, the more I just fell in love with who she is. I would ask my students, what do you know about Mrs. Haviland? And they only knew that she was a conductor in an underground railroad, right? But as I dug, there's so much more. There's so much more to her. That's just the tip of the iceberg. All of the accomplishments she made and accrued in her lifetime were just amazing. So that's what inspired me.
That's great. So what do you think helps your book stand out from other books that are written on similar topics?
Well, Mrs. Haviland, Laura, is an icon in Michigan, in her little community of Adrian, Michigan, which is close to the Raisin River where she had settled. And in Kansas, the town of Haviland, Kansas is named for her, and that's where Berkeley College is. That's where I live. But she is not well known in the mainstream. And I believe her life is so significant. I mean, she worked alongside Sojourner Truth to change the streetcar laws in Washington, D.C. in 1865. She tirelessly worked with Susan B. Anthony, Frederick Douglass, on and on the list goes. She worked in the Freedmen's Bureau through the 19th century, but she worked alongside J.R. Brown, who's John Brown's half-brother, and was able to use John Brown's sharpshooter to receive funding for the work to help the freed slaves in the state of Kansas. And in 1881, Governor St. John of Kansas named her, conferred upon her the honor of the most noble woman in the state of Kansas. So wow. There's a lot there.
Well, it's interesting. I used to teach African-American history in an all-black high school that I taught in for a few years back in the 1970s. And all these names you're bringing up are reminding me of people I talked about. So this is fun. Now, you've started a campaign of 7 steps to good trouble. Mm-hmm. I want you to talk about where the term good trouble comes from. And then how did you come to create that? And if you could, share either all or some of those 7 steps and why you feel they're so relevant for today's society.
I'm glad to do that. Thank you. Well, the term good trouble really came from the civil rights movement in the 1960s. Senator John Lewis coined that phrase, or at least he carried that phrase on from the civil rights movement, and was just, very strong in that movement and carrying that phrase. I believe that's really an apolitical phrase, as you mentioned in your introduction. But the real truth about good trouble is it requires a paradigm shift. So many times we become absorbed with our own self-interests, and good trouble requires you to make that shift to service and care for others. The first step of good trouble is to become a friend of somebody totally different than you. And Laura Haviland did that throughout her service and her time working tirelessly to free slaves. And then the second step is just going a little deeper to have care and consideration to really understand what people are going through, because we don't always take the time to do that. And today that's a huge issue. We just kind of live in our own little worlds. Step 3 is respect. And Mrs. Haviland respected everyone, whether it was the rebel sympathizers, even though she didn't agree with them at all and stood against what they taught. But she believed respect was so important for us to make positive changes. And the 4th step is to not stereotype or label people, to withhold judgment, not to judge others, because we haven't walked in their shoes. We don't really understand their lives. And that's just super important, I believe, today, because we are so quick to judge others. Step 5 is to avoid and to stay away from really violence, because violence was such a difficult issue. In the Civil War, we lost 66,000 soldiers. It's just unbelievable. And then, today we see all the violence and the eruption of riots in our city streets. So I think that's a really important one to really promote nonviolent change and action. Step 6 is to seek the truth and not talking points. And that we just live on talking points. That's just such a really important issue. I think Mrs. Haviland went deep into slavery. She would go as a spy to see what was really happening, because she did not want her passion to be based on anything but the truth, because it's the truth that really matters. And I think we don't dig deep enough today to really discover what is true. We don't have very many diplomats today or statesmen in our country, which is sad to me. And then step 7 is to take a stand for forgiveness through sacrifice and service to others. And no matter what that takes, it's always worth it. Good trouble. I really believe that a scripture really speaks to that. In John 16:33, Jesus said, "In the world you shall have trouble, but be of good cheer, for I have overcome the world." And that's my theme verse for good trouble.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I always think that in order to do social change, you're going to get in trouble. People,
exactly.
They're going to arrest you and maybe try to cancel you. The whole cancel culture thing that's going on right now.
Exactly.
It's the kind of trouble that we need to get into in order to do the 7 things you just talked about to bring about a world that's more just, socially just, and spiritually fulfilling, and all the good things that we are wanting, but seemingly a lot of people don't know how to create it anymore. So I love your book, because it really it's inspiring. As I read it, I just was really uplifted. And I want you to talk about Mrs. Haviland for a moment, because she wasn't even 5 foot tall.
4 foot 9 inches. 4 foot 9
inches. So you don't have to be a big person to make big things happen.
And she really could escape through crowds. Nobody ever suspected her of being, that active or involved. She was always wearing her Quaker garb, and that was very peaceful. So nobody ever suspected her, even though she did have a $3,000 bounty on her head.
Amazing. It's amazing. Well, I wish we had more time to talk about it. Unfortunately, with these shows, we don't. But how can people get a hold of your book, and how can they get in touch with you if they want to know more about the 7 Steps of Good Trouble movement, or if they would like to hire you to maybe come and speak for their group?
I would love that. Thank you so much, Jack. My website is undergroundangel.net. And I'm on Facebook, Underground Angel. I have my page there, and I'm on LinkedIn. But I would love to have the opportunity to just speak anywhere, anytime. I will say also that I am creating a whole YouTube series on Good Trouble that will be released very soon.
Yeah, I've seen a couple of those videos, and they're really good. So congratulations on that, too.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for joining us today, Cheryl. I really appreciate it.
Well, I cannot appreciate what you've done for us all, for me, so much. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Blessings.
Thanks to all of you for joining us today. And please make sure to tune in next week, where I'll be interviewing another inspirational guest. And until that time, I want you to think about how could you get into some good trouble, or at least look at those 7, let's call them rules, principles, whatever you want to call them, for good trouble. And maybe start applying some of those in your life. Those are important steps to having a more integral, compassionate, caring, effectual, impactful life. So until next week, put some of that into practice, and we'll see you then.